So second time round, looking at wireless mesh networks, I better stop making a habit of this, otherwise it's gonna stick. Anyway, first was Acer's offering, which, let's be honest, didn't really go as planned, especially with their setup side. And this time round, I'm looking at Netgear's offering with the Nighthawk RS200 and also 100. Now, setup here was absolutely fine this time round, but Netgear are making some pretty chunky sacrifices in the name of price, and most notably it does come down to bandwidths. The Nighthawk RS200 is a dual band router, which means it only has access to standard 2.4 GHz and 5 GHz bandwidths. It's missing that crucial 6 GHz connection, though I must say it is not really necessarily a bad thing, as the UK market, at the time of making this video anyway, only has access to lower 6 GHz bands due to Ofcom not allowing consumers to use higher bandwidths. Okay, I'm pretending to understand completely what this means for consumers, and excuse any terminology I might get wrong, but for now it's safe to say that it's not as big a problem as one might think, being a Wi-Fi 7 enabled router, though we do have also got Wi-Fi 6 gear out there and have done for some time now. But it could become a problem in the near future once 6 GHz becomes more common in the home. However, because Wi-Fi 7 has other technologies that this RS200 takes advantage of, it does mean that it can still be classed as Wi-Fi 7, and in some cases will outperform Wi-Fi 5 and 6 enabled routers. I've already seen a vast improvement on my speed test results between my Virgin Hub 4 on a 5 GHz band and the RS200 on the same band, and okay, my home broadband is only still 1 gig per second speeds, but still it is an improvement. And with the top speed of 6.5 GHz per second that this RS200 is capable of, it'll easily handle devices connected and wanting to use 1 gigabit per second broadband. Netgear does claim 80 devices can be connected simultaneously, however, who has 80 devices in the house right now? I certainly don't. That is a lot of juice. But for more office-based networks with staff and laptops and desktops about the place, I can see it being used there. So let's have first a look at its physical design, and to be honest, for something called Nighthawk, it's very understated, and also compared to their older products. It sits at the same rough size as my Hub 4 from Virgin, and it has a bunch of status lights down the front and has some sharp edges towards the nose. It looks posh and would fit into a modern space, no problem at all. Down the back though, it is really nice to see that there are a number of ports, and you can find a 2.5 gigabit WAN port, a 2.5 gigabit LAN port, 3 gigabit Ethernet ports, and a single USB-A 3.0 port for storage devices. There are 4 internal antennas for that 360-degree signal, which would be great if you could place this as central to the home as possible. Setup with the app was fairly simple, though a slightly lengthy process compared to the last Wi-Fi 7 router we've just seen, and the stages required me to create a new account and a new admin password and firmware updates, that kind of thing. One thing I did find odd though was that the router created 2 Wi-Fi channels named exactly the same thing inside of my wireless settings on my phone, and connecting to one of them almost interrupted my initial setup, until I connected to the other one, which worked right away, and I could continue with the final stages. It would have been nice for that differentiation to take place to make it easier on its initial setup, but we got there in the end. But this, I do believe, had something to do with what Netgear are calling Smart Connect, which is essentially their version of auto-band switching that usually happens with routers, depending on signal and distance and congestion and all of that jazz. Though if you want, you can turn this off so you can connect to each individual bandwidth you choose. However, the time it takes to connect to the RS200, to change the setting, to then hit save and reconnect to the router just takes the absolute biscuit. It is such a lengthy process, and changing settings inside the app isn't as simple as just toggling an option. You've got to wait, and you've got to wait, and you've got to wait, and wait, and wait, and you get the point. It takes forever. However, once you're inside of the home screen of the app, everything I think is laid out very nicely in terms of where to go to get each setting. From top to bottom and left to right, you can see your device manager and each connected device. You've got Netgear Armor, which is a paid-for subscription service for added security. It's powered by Bitdefender. I activated the free trial, didn't touch it again. Same with parental controls, everything is pretty much locked behind a paywall, unless you just want to pause use of the internet on a particular device in the house. However, if you have a child, they could just disconnect from the router and begin using their phone on 4G anyway, so the setting here is pretty useless unless you did want to subscribe to their monthly paid-for subscription service for advanced parental controls. I didn't do anything like that, so I can't comment on what's available, but I'm assuming there will be videos out there on YouTube for you to check out, but I didn't bother doing any of this here because I, quite frankly, have no one here because I live alone. I don't need any internet security. You have also got a speed checker or a Wi-Fi analysis to check the stability of the network and the ability to set up a guest network if you wanted to do that, and some more traditional Wi-Fi settings like changing your password and network names and things like that. All pretty intuitive and all neatly wrapped up in a nice looking app. And in terms of performance on the internet, well, to be frank, I live alone. I have one gaming PC and a mobile phone and a laptop I barely use. The gaming PC is connected via Ethernet to the 2.5 gigabit LAN port, so I'm getting max speed there. My phone is the only thing that saw an improvement, and that was only going from around 400 megabit per second to 1000 megabit per second on a download, and the same on an upload because Virgin Media cap our upload speeds to buggery. So I'm not really winning there, really. So yeah, big performance jump over my Virgin router, but I can still load an Instagram feed quickly while connected to the Virgin router. So who is this really for? Well, families, people with lots of devices, people who will be connecting said devices to this thing all at once and trying to stream content, play Warzone on the PlayStation, work from home, talking on Teams calls, and if you're in an office environment with lots of Wi-Fi enabled devices. The RS200 can be found online for around £200 at the time of writing this script, which really isn't that bad at all in terms of price to get into Wi-Fi 7. There is the RS300 too if you're desperate for that tri-band inclusion of the 6 GHz bandwidth, maybe for you. But to be honest, there's a whole range of them right up to the RS700, which can transfer data at 19 gigabit per second and has a 10 gig port on the back, but it costs £700. So needs must here, but if you've got some old tatty wireless router, or you want a bit more performance than those that come with an ISP, like my Hub 4 for example from Virgin, and you've got the devices to warrant it, £200 I don't think really is that bad at all. Or £300 if you're desperate for that 6 GHz bandwidth, but only you know your needs.